just now. Because, as I say, quite a few people are accessing the archive of sort of recordings that we have from the Futures of Design Education series. So welcome everybody, thank you all very much for coming along. I think this is the 9th discussion that we've hosted. So we've kind of restarted it a little bit. We do have some really interesting speakers coming up over the next few months, and we're working on sort of January, February, into the new year, into 2022. We've got a couple of very interesting speakers, hopefully in the new year, maybe starting to talk about some quite controversial topics, or really pushing, if you like, the boundaries of what the future, or indeed what the word future might be defined as in the Futures of Design Education series. So I'll just post a quick link to all of the events, if I can do that quickly here. So that's all the events that we know about. The next event, I think, is on the 19th of November, and that is going to be, I think it's Tommaso who's going to be presenting on that, sort of looking at embodied knowledge in design. I think Tommaso was hoping to be here today, but I can't see him. So that one, oh, you are. No, sorry. Never mind. So please feel free to sign up for these future events. The other thing that might be of interest, sorry, Sucharita, I'll come to you in just a second. It's just in case anybody is interested in any of these. The next DRS conference in 22 will be in Bilbao, and it will also be a hybrid event. There's going to be, I think, an online mix, an online and sort of face-to-face mix. So I think there's multiple opportunities to get involved. Precisely on the detail of that, I'm not entirely sure yet, but there are 3 calls that might be of interest to anyone interested in design education. We have one on studio matters, looking at studio as a kind of core pedagogy. One on this track theme, the Futures of Design Education. And again, that's kind of looking quite broadly at a definition of futures. Then there's also one on design literacies hosted by Ursula Bravo of, I think it's Universidad de Desarrollo in Santiago.
UDD.
UDD, cool. So there's 3 tracks there for anyone interested. But never mind that, today we are more interested in Sucharita, my apologies, I keep mispronouncing your name. Sucharita Beniwal from NID in India. And I think, Sucharita, you're going to talk about sort of embodied practices at a distance, or material practices at a distance.
Yeah.
So without further ado, I'll just let you go for it, and feel free to take the floor.
Hi, Derek, I'll share screen because I wanted to show some visuals.
No problem at all. I will just sort that out. Okay, so you should be okay to do that now.
Okay. Can you see a screen?
Nearly getting there. Teaching practice-based design through virtual media.
Yeah.
Perfect.
Yeah. Is that good?
Brilliant. Perfect.
Yeah. Hi, so I'm Sucharita, and I teach in textile design and foundation program at the NID, the oldest school in this part of the world in design. And I come from a discipline of making, and a discipline where tactility and experiential knowing holds great values. So the textiles by dictionary meaning is a flexible material created through interlocking network of yarns, fibers, or threads. And at NID, it's as much about locating the discipline in the identity that textiles brings, as much as it's about the materiality. And 18 months of hybrid teaching in this discipline, and a similar discipline also that got affected was ceramics, but I don't come from that discipline, so I can't talk about it. So it was all about how do you teach making, because making was and is a very important part of textiles teaching at NID. And looking at these aspects of it, both from the technique and the function at a remote stage, became a big issue. I'm going to talk through 2 of the courses that I will use as an example, as a case study example. The first being weaving. This is how weaving would happen in the in the scenario when everyone was here. And as one understands, it's about touch and senses and experiencing that, and a lot of bodily engagement that one forgets to describe when one is trying to teach it. And on one hand, while weaving is also understood as maths, as you see the left-hand bottom corner, a lot of it is about understanding the structural basis, which you could very easily do in a much better way actually on the online. And it also allowed the students to keep on revisiting, which became a strength in the online method. It is the physicality of weaving itself, which became something that had to be revisited again and again. So while they could weave in the tapestry kind of mode, you have these DIY kind of classes, a very craft understanding of textiles that happens across the globe, and one could send them frames, or on the other hand, the strength of looking at fabric in your home, something that usually doesn't happen, because here we are trying to show them archival material, we're trying to show them good examples of what is good woven cloth. So we never look at the everyday, and the everyday actually turned out to be this amazing diverse world of fabrics that each of them had in their homes, and one would have not noticed because one would have not been home. So there was a strength that came in it, but the making of it was again something that felt a little incomplete. In spite of that, what you see at the extreme right in the black is something that to have done in a tapestry kind of situation is again a benchmarking in skill levels of how well fabric can be woven. Because weaving fine cloth in tapestry, tapestry strength is pictorial and material, pictorial material representation, whereas weaving it in drapable cloth becomes an issue. And one of the students managed to make this cloth, which was this fine count. At some point, we brought them back here. It was in the till this stage, I was extremely happy and proud of myself that, oh my God, teaching can be taught online. Why was I worried all these years? And what happened was when they came back to access the workshops in person, working on these looms, I realized how much we had missed. Because when I show you this next picture and you see the quality of weaving that the same students could do, you understand that you cannot teach some parts of how the tactility or the tacitness of how do you mend a yarn in a warp? How do you understand at what point your beating of fabric is enough? A similar thing happened in fieldwork-based research. This is something that I again do for textiles. And we go to craftsmen, we go to craft museums, and you're studying the textile archive at NID, and you're looking at these pieces which have been collected over the 50 years by the department. Actually, they've been collected in the first few years, so they're now more than 40 years old. Or we go to Kutch, which is extremely rich in its textile heritage of embroideries. And then you're trying to make them study, oh, this is a benchmark, this is beautiful. But one misses the everyday. And what happened this time was they looked at their clothes, at their mother's wardrobes, what was inside their homes. And suddenly we had documentations of textiles and clothing that we would have never touched upon on our regular teaching of the course. So while the access to the physical archive may have got disrupted, the strength that came in was their own diversity of looking at what was within their homes. A similar field course that is undertaken in foundation is a rural visit to villages, where the students do a very long, slow ethnography over 10 days. They sit and draw within villages. They're broken down into 20 people, then they go into smaller sections. And the end of it is a display in which the villagers themselves engage with the students, because these students have been around for 10 days looking at the representation that the students have done of this. This year, it became about locating yourself within your fieldwork. The students were not very happy doing this as fieldwork, because they had to be located at their home. This happened in the second wave that happened in India, and it was in a really bad time this year when this course came. And it was very strenuous on them, because this course is always understood more as a fieldwork and as an experience of the other. And suddenly they were forced to experience the everyday and the common, what was their home. And they had, it is like, because it's your home, you did not want to look at it in many ways till before this course. But what happened excitingly was, we got a diversity across India, because otherwise when we take them on field, we take them to just one place in one area with faculty. Here they were, and then they are locating themselves within their house and looking at their own house in so many ways. On top of that, there was a whole knowing of each other through this digital window across the country, and this amazing range of native places that came out. So this really transformed the entire course. And with this, I'll just come to my concluding slide, that for me, the pandemic and the teaching in this hybrid mode became about, in weaving, it was about the everyday and the specialized. And there was strength that the online and the digital and the remote teaching, with the gap of time, afforded the students. Similarly, in the environmental perception course, the fieldwork was in a known field, yet it created so many new things. And in the traditional textile, they learned to archive and find the archive within the home. With this, I would like to stop my screen, but I have a short provocation to ask of you. So to me, because fieldwork, being on the field, making is all about doing. What would one, and you can just write words or type something in the chat. How would you tell someone who doesn't know to tie a shoelace, like in a hybrid kind of a mode or a digital kind of mode? How would you want to do that?
Well, thank you very much, Sucharita. That was really, really interesting. As always, I'm really impressed by the richness of experience that you seem to have encouraged your students to engage in. I mean, some of those pictures, the richness of the context of the students, those pictures, they were just absolutely, they were filled with juicy imagery. It looked really amazing. And once again, I'm always impressed when I speak to you, Sucharita, just how well you understand that this is completely independent of the mode of teaching. It's the richness of the experience that matters. Okay, cool. The shoelace example, I think that it's worth playing with that one. This sounds like it's almost like one of Bateson's challenges. So he had these lovely I think it was I can't remember who retweeted it recently on Twitter. He had these kind of lecture series where he asked students to describe what a clock does, or how would you describe, or how would you teach somebody to tie a shoelace. I think it was a similar example that he gave. So yeah, if anybody has a response to that, please feel free to shout out with it. And similarly, if anybody has any questions or any observations on what Sucharita has just been talking about, that would be good too. But it seems to me, Sucharita, please forgive me if I've summarised this incorrectly, there's something still about the detail of how we manipulate or work with the material world that still seems to be quite difficult to translate to other areas of communication or sharing. And that seems to be the kind of focus of what you're talking, or very much talking about today. Would that be a sort of summary?
Yes, to me, Derek, and yeah, Nicole and everyone who was here, yes, there is. And for that, I actually like the word I've heard you use in some talks, the sidelong glances. There is something in the embodied that I couldn't just transfer through the screen. And yes, Nicole, videos was a great way of working, and for teaching them how to mix color and painting for the foundation. I made a lot of videos for weaving there are videos and I made videos, but somehow it didn't hit me till they came here that there was something else that I never really could convey through the screen alone.
Yeah, I think that's maybe what's emerging in some of the responses. I was just going to do a similar. Well, Nicole, did you want to?
Yeah, no, it's Sucharita, really amazing. I mean, you've been a bit of, aware what you're doing, but it's just a great summary, really. And I do think about this. What is missing, is this is the dialogue in the moment, and we see that a lot with distance students in general, is that often you come to a situation where you have to make a decision, and this decision is quite important, whether it's going the right way, in a sense, you're actually fabricating something that is according to certain standards you don't know yet or not, right? And I think these moments really require a dialogue in the moment, which is so difficult to recreate at the distance. Once due to the immediacy, proximity, I think Derek has this interesting idea of space plus time, proximity, but also in the the richness of that, that explanation, that turning point. So is fascinating.
So I wonder, sorry, Sucharita, on you go.
No, but I know that you like Open University, like where you are, Nicole, and where Derek is, you have been managing this aspect of remote learning. So or teaching or remote facilitation, and this understanding of delayed learning coming to it was something that I, as an educator, also had to learn, which I think I didn't factor in which I don't remember to factor in. I think here you were saying something.
No, I'm just going to pick up on that. I think that it'd be interesting to maybe explore. Maybe we could, other people could join in and maybe share these examples of. It's the things. What was your phrase? Sorry, Charity, I'll try to find it. Where is it? Where is it? No, I can't find it. I did write it down. Yep, you mentioned it. It's like the things we forget to describe. This to me was the big lesson over the last 2 years. And it was a big lesson when we were trying to convey how we teach at a distance as well, because there's a whole bunch of stuff, even when we tried to make all that explicit, there's a whole bunch of stuff that still is inside us, still is implicit. So I'm wondering whether we could maybe unpick some of those things we forget to describe. So far, we've got the sidelong glances. I love that notion, Nicole, of the dialogue in the moment. Also hinting at, I think, in the text as well, and it was obvious in your discussion as well, Sucharita, the building not just on the moment, but in that moment, it depends on building on the student's moment as well. So it's building on the student's conception. You've given lovely examples of building on the student's context or their own experience and how you might draw that in. And it's in that moment that you're almost, as a teacher, well, I think, I don't know what other people think here, you're almost constantly making stuff up, trying to bridge that kind of gap between what's in your head and in the student's head. And there is something special about doing that synchronously. I don't know if anyone has any other examples of those in the moment things, or those tacit things that might be useful to make explicit. Because this is the stuff you don't get paid for, by the way. Just saying. Don't be embarrassed to share these examples. I know that some of them can be embarrassing. Because a lot of them are very, very informal things. I mean, Sucharita, sorry, did you want to come in?
I think Toby was saying that what methods of reflection we've worked with them to come back to it. So the reason I asked you how to tie a shoelace, I mean, I'll tell you why it came as a, because it is when they were here, and what happens in weaving, what does not happen in weaving when you're doing it remotely in a tapestry is your warp never breaks. Somehow, because it's small and it's framed. You will never go through a warp breaking in a tapestry kind of situation. I mean, it may have happened to someone, but it's extremely rare. But in a loom kind of situation, because of the tool that you're working with, your warps break. And this was something I forgot to describe. This was something that they experienced firsthand when they tried to do it. And it was in teaching them how to mend the warp that I realized that there is no way I can convey this in a digital kind of world. And while the hybridity of learning the structures or the maths of it, it was really good for the students who find it more difficult to understand the mathematics of weaving. Like it's this great strength because you can revisit, and you can visit in your own time. But this aspect of how do you teach this aspect of, it's like how can you teach the sense of a taste? You can teach the recipe, but how will they compare the recipe to the recipe that you already say is the recipe? It's to their last recipe. And that is where I've constantly felt a gap. But I would like to know, Toby, what you would suggest for methods of reflection. It would be a good learning to take back.
Thanks. I'm Toby today. I'm John, obviously, not Toby. It's just one of those things. I've not been on Zoom for a long time, actually. So someone's obviously been messing with my name. The thing I was thinking about, Sucharita, was in the context of it being online still. So they might be working practically in their own homes or doing the research methods, but ultimately when you then are with them, they're still back online, aren't they? So I know what we were doing was obviously extensively using things like Miro and different online tools, and trying to in quite a very structured way, try to take them almost like back through the processes and the things that they're done, and start to cluster, start to kind of, use basic sort of Venn diagram style approaches that ask them to kind of reflect and deconstruct actions, activities, reflections, thoughts, things like that. And then from that point, when they're sort of disaggregating their thoughts and their feelings, they sort of reconstruct that back together again, to hopefully maybe reach a different understanding.
Yeah, I could try that this time because we are still in this space of deconstructing.
Yeah, an in-between space. Yeah.
I wonder is there also a cleverer way to use maybe some of the structures of learning to do exactly that as well, Toby / John. There's maybe a kind of like older model. It's kind of like Richard Feynman's model, if you want to learn something, learn it, then communicate it, then teach it. Is that, but maybe in an applied sense, maybe it's another one of those assumed things. Okay, so we don't assume that we demonstrate the teaching of a shoelace once and therefore everybody will know how to tie a shoelace. We would expect that maybe through repetition, exposure, that people actually develop maybe their own subtly different ways. Is that lovely definition of the implicit in the design studio, the like but not exactly like, and that through constant repetition, and that's reflection in action, as Sean would say, I suppose, students are actually changing what they do and they're kind of learning their own method of tying the shoelace. What that maybe needs with, and that's maybe why I've suggested you've got the teaching one where you might demonstrate it, but then the second one might be the coaching where you're demonstrating less but you're allowing it. And maybe that's where the invisible things such as waiting for failure, knowing that failure is going to happen, or knowing that other things that you can't predict are going to happen. That was a lovely example that you gave, Sucharita, of the warp breaking. Was it warp or was it weft? It was warp. Yeah, sorry, of course. Yeah, of course it was warp. I've learned quite a lot about textiles over the last few months talking to Sucharita. Yeah, and then maybe that builds up to the student developing that practice, but constantly. Well, I suppose again it goes to my thing, I suppose, about the expertise thing is where it needs to then go to that conscious level, John, that So you've got this kind of practice, you can tie your shoelace, but now how do you take it to the next level? And getting students to almost teach, or then become teachers, if you like, of that forces the extra, like we've had to do over the last couple of years. I don't know.
I think it's related. It's like constructing their own meaning, isn't it? It's sort of instructional, but you don't want it just purely instructional. You want them to then, from that instruction base, generate their own meaning and understanding from it. That, like you say, is adaptive and is personal and is to them, rather than, you know, so it is unique. Yeah.
I'm going to bring Robert in. Robert, I think you have a hand up.
Hello, nice to see you all. That's really fascinating stuff. So I have an example. I team teach with Bo Kellerstein, who's you probably met in one of these sessions before. I think we pretty much do all of our teaching as team teaching in the room. By team teach, actually what we're doing a lot of the time is Bo and I interacting together in a really imperceptible way. I mean, it's hard to describe and hard to formulate. It would be very difficult to do that. But we are interacting around designs and around challenges and all kinds of stuff. And the kind of dynamics of our exchange is really a key aspect of what we want the students to pick up. And we see that when we're in the classroom, okay, we know, we kind of got a sense we're doing this, we're in this flow. And then the students kind of pick that up and they're starting to behave in the same way. And then they're going off into group work and we're seeing them behaving in the same way and interacting in the same way. A lot of it's to do with kind of, there's kind of things like respecting the other person, you know, not breaking it into their flow, but just feeling it's the right time to add something in. So those kind of very intangible things, but really important lessons for the students. Obviously, we've been teaching a lot in teams and we're going to carry on teaching in teams. That's difficult to do. And the students are missing out on that. And obviously when they're in their group work, they're not, you know, they're not getting into that flow. Is that a familiar kind of experience?
Yeah, definitely. I think to a certain extent, and we've talked about it in our team, it's when you're delivering still on teams and even having meetings like this, there's almost like a reinforcement of what's expected because of the format. Whereas actually when you're physically in the studio or in the workshop, or that all those preconceptions are constantly being kind of challenged, aren't they, and developed through that nuanced interaction.
Yeah, but it's not in a kind of sudden way. It's very slow, iterative, and they can pick it up from you as you go along.
I'm wondering though, is that a function? And this is a kind of open question, because what's interesting as well about Sucharita's sort of presentation is just the extent of it. I'm reminded again of, like, is it Robert Venturi or was it Eames? I think it might have been Venturi's. It's his phrase that either or, you know, if you have a choice between distance or face-to-face, it's just like a poverty of language, if you like. What's wrong with both and what's strong, or so comes across so strongly in what Sucharita has just presented, is that both of these modes have deep, deep strengths to them, whether it is the personalization or communication of contextual learning, but also recognizing that the face-to-face allows a richness of, say, you know, in the moment or tacit learning. It really shines a light on the absolute strengths. I mean, looking at this, why wouldn't we want to make use of both of these things? In fact, why wouldn't we want to maybe strengthen what we do in an online space? And I wonder whether we could extend interaction, maybe even through the examples that we're giving just now. We do spend a lot of time at Open University almost trying to be exemplars of how to behave yourself online, and it can be really difficult and tiring. You know, hosting a tutorial where no student is speaking and trying to get them to speak, that can be really quite challenging and tiring, but it can be done. I just don't know that we have the expertise yet, or we're aware of the expertise of how to do that. But what seemed to offer me hope was just the richness of offering between those two spaces of learning, or two modes of learning that you offered, Sucharita. I don't know, maybe it's an open question. Because the counter to that might be that, yes, we might think that Studio is open and free and experimental, but there are quite a lot of cemented behaviours. There's a lot of people that don't contribute in a face-to-face setting.
There's always a flip side, isn't there? There's always both sides, because those
Absolutely.
structures that we talk about as being supportive are actually potentially barriers as well to some other people. Yeah.
I'm going to bring in.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, Sucharita first, please. Yes, I'll come to you in a second, Tanvir.
No, I agree with what you just said, because the suddenly vocal on the screen are not vocal, like you, and the certain conditions of behavior on the screen and the studio, they reinforce certain things which one now noticed, because now one had a comparative. There is some things that also happen in the studio which may be less democratic in some ways for each of those students there, but one did not notice it till one also had this mode of engaging them. And then one realized that this person who was comfortable with being on the screen and being articulate is suddenly become very withdrawn and very quiet, because I don't know the reason, but in the in-person format, they're a very different student. And then you realize that there may be something to how the space and the physicality of peer works on the students, where this self-guided, self-paced learning helps and empowers some of them in some ways which the studio can never do. So, I mean, it was a very point to put out there.
Cool. I'm going to come to Tanvir. Did you want to come in? How you doing? Good to see you, by the way. Haven't seen you for ages.
Hi, Sucharita. Really lovely presentation. Hi, everyone. Yeah, I was just picking up on these kind of in-between spaces that you were talking about. And I was really interested when you said that in the field work or visiting the remote villages, that students had to do it themselves rather than, if I'm right, would it usually be with one of the tutors? So I was wondering if there was a difference for this time round, and what differences there might have been when students were doing things in a more student-led way.
Tanvir, just repeat that part. In the field, also the faculty goes with them.
Okay,
like we also accompany them in the field, but the difference that becomes in the field is that they are in the village that they are. When they break into groups of individual, we may not enter each village house that a student might. So say a student has entered a particular house, while I may be there at the village center, I may not enter each of the space that they've gone into. A similar thing happened in the online. Obviously, we were not in the spaces there. But what was, now I would want your question again, because I thought that the part where you thought, or you said that we don't, like they're on their own, but we are still there. We are physically in the space, and there are night reviews every day. So,
okay, and that was even during COVID?
No, that's what, in the COVID, we stopped the field work. So they were the home became the field.
Right. Okay.
And it was very tough on them, because there's only so much you want to look at your home. And more than that, I thought they were very brave. There is very little of your home that you want to show to the other. These are 18-year-olds, 19-year-olds. They have personas which are very different on the Instagram. And then we are literally forcing them that this is the only way you can do those. So there are assignments built around studying your kitchen, which in the field, it's much easier because you're studying the other. Even if it's similar to yours, you don't have to tell your peers that my house is like this, even if you're coming from a village yourself. But here, there was no option. They were locked in because we were in the second wave, and they did it. And that was very impressive to me in some ways, because suddenly we had a diversity of socioeconomics documented through drawings. We had a diversity of region. I mean, we've never had an environmental perception like this before. The limitation of it is also something else. There's something else that's happened, which we'll see in the next year, because this course affects a certain way of reading the other, and that we would have to compensate in some other way. But
yeah,
I,
no,
I
just thought
answered your question.
Yeah, no, I thought it was really interesting because, you know, when it's student led, there is going to be more diversity, and you were able to see a wide range of regions, for example. So, you know, there was more richness to the project brief in a way. So, you know, there was obviously value in having the students use their own settings as the starting point, rather than everybody using one setting. So I was interested in that student-led pedagogy and what that might have lent itself and what value you can get, and whether that might be something to build on in future when you de-hierarchize the expert-led approach.
Yeah, I was going to pick up on exactly that, Tanvir, and also referring to your work as well. It's that you've got this lovely archive at NID, really important, but then what you might also have is this emerging student archive of year on year, you know, and student observed archive, because it's the archive of the thing itself, but also the observation. And that's what captures the Tanvir's grandmother's way of doing X, that I remember from your work, Tanvir.
Yes.
That's quite powerful, it seems to me. Are you planning on keeping that archive maybe as a living thing that students document, or? Sucharita, yeah, planning on keeping the student work as almost an archive within NID, or?
It says it anyway stays the foundation program. So the one-year foundation program keeps the archive of student work across the years. So we have a huge archive. Why it's not printed and out in the open, I don't know, but we have a year documentation of this. So it's there with the foundation program. This year's is online, so it's also scanned and in the digital world, but they keep the actual physical one also.
Cool.
The student-led part, Tanvir, I'm still forming you are right, it changes how the whole course is now shaped. And this year we're going to do a repeat of that, because the foundation is only a student body that we've not called. We're still going to conduct everything for them online. So instead of being a 4-year program, in some ways, we're a 3-year on-site and 1-year online kind of a thing. And yes, you're right, it really changes how they were looking, but they're still very guided. I would like to push the student-led to another kind of a phase. It's still, a lot of it is by we going with what we want them to see. So this could be a good provocation to work on.
Mm-hmm. So that was the thing I was going to come to next, Sucharita, but I think you maybe answered this question and just what you've said there. So we've recognised that there might be significant advantages in multiple modes, if you like, of learning and teaching. So my question was going to be, again, I think some of us are struggling with this in settings where the decision is made for you at a political or a social or even an economic level. What do you do when we come back? How do we go back to normal? What do you take back with you into your normal practice? What do you leave behind? How do you make changes? I think you've already described it a bit. You're going to retain a blended mode, if I correctly understood you. You're going to maybe split it by year. But here's the provocation. Oh, sorry. Yes, Sucharita. Sorry. Yeah.
No, I just said yeah. I didn't say anything.
Okay, cool. So are you planning to blend anything in the 3 years, the main course, or does the blend continue into those 3 years with just the foundation being the distance component?
Currently, it's because the country still doesn't know their regions. A lot of our student population comes from Kerala. Kerala has had no respite through the COVID-19, even now. Another area that a lot of students come from is Pune and Bombay. And again, though Maharashtra and Kerala have somehow never got respite. So as of now, it's online and offline in weird ways. Someone gets 12 weeks, someone gets 8 weeks on studio access, some teachers are getting 6 weeks. But that's, I think, not a decision that I, like, it's an institutional decision and it's a government decision. So that's, but what I read from what you're saying is that there are aspects of this, like the recordings that I did. I think I'm going to share them. Like now I have my students here in person. I can access them in the studio, but I'm still using the digital. So I'm putting because the way it taught me to archive and document, I don't think I had done it like this till I was forced to. So right now, the current studio that I'm taking, it's this physical and digital kind of a thing that I'm.
Cool. That's really interesting to hear, because okay, so here's a provocation that I might put out to everybody then. I'll come to that in just a second. So it's almost the difference between a contingent decision, or say a political decision, or a decision based on the medical needs of like a particular context, as you've just described there, Sucharita. But then there's also your decision as an educator to say, I'm going to take these benefits and put them together. You're not necessarily supported to do that. And you might be, we can maybe talk about the NID context specifically, but a lot of teachers haven't been supported to look at multiple modes because it takes a lot more time. But here's the provocation. If we've just admitted and we know that by going from this mode to that mode, those voices that are heard here are no longer going to be heard here, which means that those voices were never heard in that mode for the last, whatever, 120 years, 200, 300, 400 years, whatever. If we know that there is this difference, then we are accepting that difference and accepting that those voices should not be heard in our educational, or in the paradigm that we are supporting, if you like, educationally. Now, that's quite an extreme and radical position, some would say, but I'm offering it as a provocation. If we know that there are these differences, these benefits that we could be taking, then why are we not doing that? That might not be our decisions individually. Maybe they are. Maybe that's something we could talk about. It could be an institutional decision. I know certainly in the UK, there is massive political force just now to get people back face-to-face, to deliberately push people face-to-face. There's massive financial penalties for not doing so. It's one of the reasons why we have one of the highest COVID rates in the world just now, but that's another story. So maybe these aren't within our control, but I suppose I'm guessing putting that out there as a provocation in the sense of, are there things within our control that we could or should be doing? And at what point does it make our jobs difficult or too difficult to do? Yeah, I don't know if anybody wanted to respond to that, or sorry, Leslie, yeah.
Not quite. Well, what you just said made me think of something in one of my own classes, you know, so like during the pandemic, I never thought of, before the pandemic, I mean, and I work, I suppose, in accessibility, inclusivity in a kind of way, right? I mean, I'm normally dealing like with race and oppression and other things, but I'm still that in the space of inclusion. And during the pandemic, I started to have hearing impaired participants in my classes. And I never thought about that before, that they were excluded before, and the Zoom classes gave them this access. And then when we went back in person, they all disappeared again, you know? And so like, I actually had a class last week where I intentionally invited, there's a deaf UX designer in Florida, and I intentionally invited him to my class. And then we had to go through the whole logistics, which we would have done automatically during the pandemic. And then because now we've gone back in person, we had to go through this really complicated process of getting the interpreter and making sure we had captions and, you know, all of that. And so I've been kind of struck by that, you know, how people have been excluded, just as you said, people that we never thought of really did not have access in the old mode, and they're kind of going to disappear again. And is this good enough? So that's a question that I've been asking myself. How can we allow this? You know, and another kind of aside, I have a student who has a mobility issue that I wasn't aware of during the pandemic. So this is now like my third semester teaching him. And only now, because we're back in person, am I aware of it? So, you know, like recently he had, you know, some issue with his wheelchair and he has to be out of class for 4 weeks. And I thought, why are we doing this? You know, why are we again making our classes inaccessible at this stage? And Tanvi had the same, a similar kind of incident.
Yeah, Tanvir, did you want to talk to that one?
Yeah, sorry, I've got the legacy hand there. But yeah, Leslie, exactly the same thing happened to me, and it made the whole department rethink how we teach online. A profoundly deaf student, and nobody was equipped to deal with it, and it made I had to change everything about the teaching because I use a lot of video clips. And the video clips didn't always come with subtitles, and yeah, it was really, really pedagogically a real challenge to think. And then it obviously makes you think, how inclusive am I? That's what I base my teaching on. And yet these kind of quite simple things I hadn't ever really considered about language, and who I really learned from was a note taker. So that person taught me so many things about how to use words and how to make it more inclusive. So yeah, it was a big learning curve for me and everybody.
Nicole.
Yeah, exactly the same. The work that Muriel and I are doing currently with students with a mental health disability taught us exactly that. Quite surprisingly, though, that many students felt actually more included at the distance, even though we are a distance university, but there were some opportunities that were face-to-face and they missed out of that because of different anxieties or mobility issues, or there are definitely these things. It's really amazing. They always, talking to him, always said about how they felt excluded of physical classes because there was a strict structure of timetabling, for example. So I know studio classes a little bit, but still, you know, we have timetables. And if they just don't feel in that moment they can face other people, then they will miss out and eventually will drop out. So there are definitely in that space lots of benefits here as well on the distance part.
Yeah, it does make you wonder because sometimes the technology, it's almost like the purpose of the technology doesn't seem to be, a lot of this stuff, it does seem that it could be automating or helping take the edge of at least some of the stuff that we do. Some of it's been quite successful and not all of it has been though. It's just made me realise as well, I think we don't have full, I know we've got full transcripts, but we don't have full audio descriptions of all of the Futures series, for example. And well, I know just from our practice at the OU as well, Nick, even just providing rich descriptions of images, not just, you know, this is a picture of an iPhone and, you know, there you go, that's it. Actually describing what it is you intend by the image and actually, you know, generating a narrative. It does take a lot longer. I think it's a necessary length. I think it's something we should be doing. We should maybe recognise it more, perhaps, though. Yeah.
Just before Muriel, Miro is actually quite an accessibility nightmare as well, by the way. Everyone loves it in design, and actually it's not so inclusive. Sorry, Muriel.
One particular class, one group that I had with some level 3 innovation students, because we'd all been forced to go online, I found that once we built up some relationships and from the tutorials, when we needed to talk about projects, we actually opened up the access because there were students that were having to work with young children, teaching at home and things like that. And so we were able to agree a time that suited them. And also we had communities where the bandwidth was very different, so not everyone could see video recordings and things like that. But actually, by just sort of taking some of the formalities away from and not making a tutorial, opened up lots of conversations online and in the chat box that I'd never, that had a really diverse set of ideas for their concepts, for their projects and things, and it was amazing. And I think it was because we'd taken some of those barriers away from them, and people could join at a time that suits. They could, and we actually had a regular little meeting, and they really, and because they knew each other and were built, it lent itself very well to developing, and we actually had that design collaboration. So although we've missed face-to-face tutorials working at Open University, I think there have been, like you've all mentioned, there have been some strong benefits from strengthening our online resources. I think one big benefit too is that we can record our tutorials, or we can record these discussions and things. So again, that opens it up to a wider access to people that might not be able to attend, or you can put captions in and things. So yes, it helps to make it. I have found there's been opportunities to make things more inclusive. But thank you for all your inspiration with your work, Sucharita. I've been impressed with what you've been doing.
It's our students. Yeah. Also, thank you.
Just not to put you on the spot as such, Sucharita, but I'm wondering if, I mean, you've already described sort of how you are currently maintaining sort of a couple of modes, if you like, of learning and teaching with students. When it does, or if it does go back to normal, do you see that being different? Do you see this being something that you're going to sort of keep up as a practice? Or if not, which bits of it, if you could only keep one or two bits, which bits would you keep, so to speak? Or is that too tricky a question? Sorry if it is.
Yeah. Like just the other day, we had this thing in the class when someone wanted, so one of the girls was ill, and we realized that if we were on a meet kind of a situation, it could get recorded. So we just did that. Like one of us logged in and we just recorded. So those kind of things I would want to keep, where the recorded is there and they can revisit. There was this whole inhibition to recording, but or this way of putting work together, like it was very temporal. And now I think it was very temporal to have your work on display boards and then it goes away after a studio. But now it's, so those parts, yes. I don't know if, like, I'll have to really think what I really would want to give away and what I want to keep. But I realize I enjoy being in the presence of students as much. Like it's a different kind of a thing than just doing like this becomes, even if you're on Meet or even if it's synchronous, I don't know, that's why that word stays in my head, that sidelong glances. There's so much that happens in that space, in the simultaneous.
Just on that one, I mean, that was interesting. It didn't come up in the conversation today, but it's like the things that do get recorded. So there is one difference between the two modes that we haven't kind of touched on, and one is how you like represent a sort of interaction and connection. So when you're in a face-to-face setting, you talk, somebody else hears it. So that kind of like stimulus response at a distance. You have similar things, but there's recording that might happen, or when it's turned into chat, or when it's recorded. So if you look back at a recording of somebody trying to describe something in an embodied learning setting, what you're actually recording doesn't make any sense. If you actually look at the words, it's kind of like Donald Trump trying to make a sentence. It doesn't make any sense, but it makes sense because you're there with the context, with the thing kind of in front of you. My apologies to Donald Trump supporters. I need to say that for legal reasons. So there's this, again, it's another hint, I suppose, at what it is that, as you say, that things we forget to describe, but then the technology, what the technology pays attention to, our voice or sight or sound, these senses that we forget about the other stuff, or maybe the other space. And there's very few technologies that do these other different weird human things. There isn't an online app for, just sitting looking at trees with somebody. Maybe there is actually. There probably is actually. Somebody's gone off to patent that, haven't you? Right, yeah, we've lost them all. Anyway, I don't know. I don't know where that's going, but it's one thing that always strikes me is that when we look at the data that we have at the OU, you're looking at this data and you're thinking, but that wasn't everything. There's more to this that actually happens. It's always, you're always wondering, yeah. Nicole's nodding there.
Yeah, no, I know. I remember all the experiments of trying to segment video recordings, for example, so it makes them more accessible. You know, that you can kind of slot. I think YouTube does try to do. You know, there's certain things that like them. But again, it's not that. I can also remember work ages ago, 10 years ago. Studio tutors, and not in OU, somewhere else we worked with in a JISC project. They started recording crits from on top. You know, so quite a different perspective in a sense. But you're right. I mean, there's no technology that helps you to these glances, these feelings of textures or the smell that goes around. It's all gone. Yeah.
I know that we talked about this idea a while back, Nicole. It would be lovely to try it still. It would be lovely to actually do something like a crit recording and then get another two, say, design educators to almost do a kind of commentary, almost like a sports commentary of what's actually happening in the studio. So you're almost getting this third perspective or fourth perspective. And sometimes that will explain some of the implicit that other people will never see because they've never, even to students, it will actually make some of that awareness to students. And it can also be quite revelatory. It is actually a kind of critical pedagogical practice that can actually be done, that kind of like third person reflection. That's what I responded to on Robert's comment on team teaching, because it's really important, you know, what another person picks up on. So when you talk to each other, say to designers, you listen in, and it's important to kind of trying to see what the other person then picks up on and use, you know, attach meaning to it and importance. And that's really, you know, that's something that it's quite hard to get otherwise. Yeah, I mean, well, just on that one, Sucharita, do you have the opportunity? How are your colleagues addressing this? Are you working with people, other people, in your context in NID, or?
Yeah, we are. And in fact, there is Team Teaching Foundation. This course, of course, I was leading it, so I get to do all the planning, who is being invited. So that's why, like, the entire structuring of assignments, but it was team teaching. So all the teachers are also located remotely, and we're just, the only contact time we are having is via the digital. So I think it has been tough on many people. And what's happened with the digital, in some ways, in the synchronous requirement that is also there, is people forget that this allowance for you could only be in one place at one time, suddenly now people don't remember that. So people are constantly being told, like, yeah, but you could always join the digital, like, okay, and it's like you're in this space where you're like, okay, you're already, how is this happening? It has been tough because we're also trying to catch up time here now. It was difficult for us to learn the flip on the inclusivity, that for us it was establishing that students have the network. For us, it took a long time to figure how do we get, so they are being given allowance for the internet now, because otherwise we didn't know how to go on with our classes. So figuring all that logistic out became an issue. So then this entire thing, it's been tough on, I think, other teachers also, but there are certain things that people want to keep back. I already noticed, like, there's some theory courses. There was one theory course. So another colleague of mine was like, we'll do it online only. It's like really nice. And where actually I want to hear that part about the Miro being difficult, because I've heard this from one more person, but they're not a design person. So I assume that, okay, they find it more tough because it's not, they're not playing with post-its like we do. But I would want to hear what Nicole meant by that.
Yeah, definitely. I think maybe actually before we do that, I'll maybe call the official session to conclude it. We can maybe keep talking because I'd quite like to poke at some of that as well. Because we do have some translation stuff that does. Anyway, that's another story. Robert, if it's okay, can we hang on 2 seconds? I'll just end the session here just now, just to keep it to the hour, if that's okay with everybody. Sucharita, thank you so much for that really interesting insight to your work. Again, there's a richness and depth to it, I think, that's really quite important. And I'd love to see it explored more and communicated more. So thank you so much, Sucharita. Don't forget, everybody, the next one is on November the 19th. It's Tommaso Baggio who's going to be talking about embodied, slightly similar to what Charles has been talking about, but in another context. So we'll see how that compares and contrasts. So thank you very much, everybody, for another interesting conversation. And Sucharita, once again, thank you so much for that. It was really greatly appreciated.